I'm working on a Christmas tree skirt today, and it's made out of satin fabric, and I don't want to do a whole lot of marking because I don't want to have to launder it when I'm done stitching. So I'm going to show you a trick that I use to create simple marked lines that enable me to line up the motifs that I want to stitch without putting marking on my fabric that has to be removed later. And the way that I do that is to stitch lines of just ghost stitching. My machine is unthreaded and my bobbin is out, so you can see just by stitching a line of needle holes, I've got a nice straight line that helps me line up my stitches. The next thing that I want to do is stitch a horizontal line to kind of give me a set of crosshairs, because I need to know where to start my design up here, where to end my design down here. But I don't want to mark it with conventional marking methods, because then I just have to remove those conventional marking methods. So I'm going to use my ruler. I'm going to line up one of these lines with that line that I just stitched. And I know that there's just a little bit less than an inch space between these two feather motifs right here. So I need to get my straight line marking right down the middle of those. So I'm going to line this line up here. Line my ruler up down here so that I'll be stitching a line right dead center between these two feathers. Come up here and stitch back and forth 3 or 4 times. I'm going to come down here, do the same thing. Stitch back and forth just a couple times. Only stitching enough times to give me just this little shadowy line that's just enough for me to see exactly where I want to line up my motif. By stitching it out first, I can take a look to see, is it centered? Do I need to move it over a little bit? And this looks pretty good, so I'm going to leave it the way that it is. And now the only marking that I have to do is to come in with my rotary cutting ruler, line it up with that straight line I just stitched. I want the top of my motif to be a 1/2 inch down. I want the bottom of this motif to be right about there, just over 7 1/4 inches down. Now those are the only markings that I need to do. Now I'm going to be super smart and remember to rethread my machine, so bear with me for just a second here. Here we go. See that the tip of this design is hitting right on my straight line, right where I want it to be. So let's hope the rest of it lines up that nicely. Top, landed right where I wanted it to go. I'm a happy camper. Alright, it's lining up just the way I wanted it to line up. And I don't have hardly any markings at all to remove. So I'm pretty thrilled with the way it turned out. As you can see, I've finished stitching out my tree skirt design and my little diamond designs. I've also stitched this gold line to help me with my binding placement. This gold line is going to show me where my seam line is going to go to connect the binding to the rest of the tree skirt. This red line out here is going to be my cutting line, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I wanted to add a little bit of template work to the tree skirt just to kind of finish things off and dress things up a little bit. And I managed to come up with a design that was very, very simple, required minimal marking, and I'd like to show you how I did that. First thing that I did was continue that straight line down, the line that I created initially to help me with my diamond placement. I put a little tick mark 1/2 inch in on that line from my binding seam line placement. So now I know where the bottom of this design needs to go. Then I grabbed my large template, my large melon template, and I kind of played with placement a little bit to see where I wanted that curved line to go. Once I figured out where the line should go, I put another mark, 1/2 inch in, to show me where to stop stitching this line, and that tick mark is 1/2 inch in from this binding seam line stitched line. Did the same thing down here. So now I know where this curve starts and ends, where these curves start and end, and where this curve should start and end. To stitch, I started with my small melon template, and I stitched from the center mark to this mark right out here. Right there. Sorry, I'm cutting off my finger. I hope you'll excuse this horrible camera work. There's nobody home but me today, and the dog will not help me with my filming, so I'm doing it all by myself. So I stitched from here to here, set aside my small melon, grabbed the large melon, stitched up from this tick mark to the bottom of my diamond, repositioned my melon and stitched from the bottom of the diamond out to this tick mark, set the large melon aside, grabbed my small melon and stitched right back to where I started. So now I had kind of a curvy, funky triangle shape, and now it's time to fill in the center of that shape. So my needle is down right here, that's where I ended. And now I wanted to stitch these rays, but I didn't want to do a lot of marking, so I let my template do the marking for me. And I lined up this interior point right here with this stitched point. So this sits right on top of that point, and the side of the template snugs right up against my needles, or my machine's hopping foot, and I stitched out and back. So this is a double stitched line. Stopped with my needle down, repositioned my template, so this point is sitting on the stitched point, this side is snugged up against the hopping foot, stitch out and back. Stop with the needle down. Now I want to mark these points here and here, so I just grabbed my rotary cutting ruler, measured out 1 inch, place a little tick mark, did the same thing on the other side, measure out 1 inch, place a little tick mark. I'm done with that ruler. Now, once again, using my small melon template, backtracked along that stitched line, stopped at the tick mark, used my large melon template to stitch up to the point, stop with my needle down, reposition the template, stitch down to this tick mark, stop, backtrack about 3/4 of an inch. Once again, I'm using my small melon. This point goes right on top of this point, and the side of the template lines up with this point at the very bottom. Stitch out and back, backtrack a little bit less than 1 inch, line up this inside point on this point, and the side of the template on the bottom point, stitch out and back, backtrack, pivot the template, reposition it, stitch out and back, do the same thing on the other side, and that design is finished. As a final touch, what I wanted to do was create a stitching line, because this is satin, and if you've ever worked with satin before, you know how badly it frays. There's like 1,000,000 miles of fraying when you cut it. And I wanted something to help me control that fraying. So I just grabbed a curved template that was about the same as the curve of this gold stitched line, changed my stitches per inch to 16 stitches per inch from the 12 that I had been stitching at, because I wanted a nice tightly stitched line that would really keep that raveling from happening. And I just stitched all the way around a simple little line that is 1/4 of an inch away from this gold line. So now I can cut on this line stitch my binding on the gold line and not have a million miles of fraying thread to deal with. I hope you found this helpful. I hope that it gives you some tips to use when you want to work with a fussy fabric on your quilting machine, because as you can see, it's really easy if you just let your machine work as a partner with you. Thanks, have a good day, and happy quilting!